You are a person, which makes it incredibly tempting to assume you automatically understand what makes other people tick. You've spent your entire life observing human behavior, so it feels entirely natural to trust your gut when judging why people do what they do. But your intuition is deeply unreliable. In many cases, it is exactly wrong, leading to a state of overconfidence where we feel certain about the behavior of others, even when our assumptions have no basis in reality. One way your brain deceives you is through hindsight bias, or the I knew it all along phenomenon. When your friend eats questionable week-old pizza and immediately starts hallucinating, your intuitive sense eagerly steps in to say, I knew that was going to happen. It easily describes the past, giving you a false sense of predictive power that you don't actually possess. Look at this sequence of coin flips. We have a deeply ingrained habit of perceiving order in entirely random events. If you flip a coin and get 5 tails in a row, you have the exact same statistical odds as getting an alternating mix of heads and tails. Yet your brain flags those 5 tails as a streak, inventing a meaningful pattern where absolutely none exists. Because our minds naturally manufacture these false patterns and biases, we cannot blindly trust our own observations. We need a system designed to bypass our cognitive blind spots, the scientific method. Methodical, the first defense mechanism in this system, is operationalizing our questions. This means taking a vague, intuitive hunch, like guessing that coffee makes people smarter, and translating it into a strict, testable proposition with clear, measurable parameters. To accurately evaluate human behavior, you have to leave your subjective feelings at the door. We have to establish rigid mathematical frameworks that force us to prove our ideas with hard data. That framework is built in tiers, starting at the foundation with descriptive methods. The most detailed of these is the case study, which involves taking a thorough, in-depth look at a single individual. The problem is that by focusing so heavily on one person, you risk taking highly specific quirks and applying them to everyone else. Just because the smell of coffee makes one guy anxious doesn't mean it has that effect universally. You simply cannot replicate a unique individual's life. Instead of interviewing one person, researchers might use naturalistic observation. This involves stepping back and quietly watching subjects in their native environments, whether that's chimpanzees poking anthills in the jungle or fans yelling at a soccer game, without trying to manipulate or control the situation. While observing people in the wild is fantastic for describing exactly what a subject is doing, it is entirely incapable of explaining why they are doing it. To gather data on consciously held beliefs across large populations, psychologists use surveys and interviews. Pioneering researchers like Alfred Kinsey famously utilized this technique to survey thousands of men and women, compiling mass behavioral data on human sexual history. But surveys carry their own vulnerabilities. The data can swing wildly based on subtle phrasing. Asking someone if they want to ban something provokes a different response than asking if they want to limit it. And if you poll a room full of pacifists about arms control, sampling bias ruins any chance of representing the broader population. Descriptive methods are vital for framing our initial questions. But because they lack structural control, they are too weak to deliver definitive proof about how the human mind operates. Moving one step up the research ladder brings us to correlation. This is the process of tracking how one specific trait or behavior relates to another, allowing us to see if one event predicts the next. Imagine a scenario where a guy eats fuzzy leftover pizza and shortly after starts hallucinating laser-eyed armadillos. A clear sequence of events occurs, and it seems obvious that eating unknown fungus predicts hallucinations. When looking at a diagram linking 2 distinct events like this, it is deeply tempting to assume that variable A directly causes variable B. But this brings us to a foundational rule in data science. Correlation is not causation. A hidden, unmeasured factor, like severe sleep deprivation, could be secretly triggering the hallucinations entirely independent of the food. The fuzzy leftovers might be totally harmless, but the overlap in timing creates a powerful illusion of a direct link. It's tempting to draw conclusions from correlations, but it's super important to remember that correlations predict the possibility of cause and effect relationships. They cannot prove them. But that can only take you so far. To really get to the bottom of cause and effect behaviors, you're gonna have to start experimenting. That apex is controlled experimentation. By actively isolating variables, this is the only research method capable of definitively proving cause and effect. Look at this breakdown of a test environment. An experiment isolates the exact element a researcher wants to manipulate, known as the independent variable. You apply this variable to your experimental group while leaving your control group untouched with a placebo. Once the manipulation is done, you measure the final result. This outcome is the dependent variable, the specific behavior or metric that depends on the change you introduced. To make sure the results are pure, you must randomly assign participants to each group. This evenly distributes demographic traits and minimizes confounding variables, guaranteeing that you don't accidentally stack all the grumpy teenagers in one box and ruin the test. And to stop human bias from unconsciously swaying the outcome, researchers use a double-blind procedure. Both the test subjects and the scientists conducting the experiment are kept entirely in the dark about who receives the active variable and who gets the placebo. By strictly isolating the independent variable and blinding the participants, experiments strip away our assumptions. They provide the most robust evidence we have for establishing a cause and effect relationship. But understanding human behavior doesn't end with a single successful experiment. A one-off result, no matter how exciting, doesn't establish a scientific reality. Scientific validity rests on the process of replication. Because an experiment uses strict, operationalized language, other curious minds can perfectly rebuild your test. They can swap in new subjects, run the test again, and pool the data. It is only when those results consistently repeat across different groups and situations that a hypothesis graduates into actual scientific fact. Psychology is not a guessing game based on gut feelings. The rigid structures of the scientific method form an essential armor, protecting the study of our minds from the real, documented flaws of our minds.